thank you all for joining in. This is Track 2 Women in Technology, powered by HerTech. And here we are with Shweta Biswas, who's a Senior Technology Product Manager, Taylor & Francis, to discuss the basics of product thinking. Shweta, can you tell us a little bit about the workshop to begin with, and then we can kickstart the session. I do want to tell the audience here, if you have any questions for Shweta during the session, please feel free to put it in the Q&A section here in the Zoom meeting that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. It will show up as a question to be answered, and we'll have it answered for you at the end of Shweta's workshop. Over to you, Shweta.
Thank you so much. So just a brief about the presentation today. So I want to talk about product thinking, which I'm sure a term more and more is coming up in discussions. And what I want to outline in the presentation, hopefully, is sort of what is product thinking, what are the concepts in product thinking, and talk about how you can use product thinking in your teams, because I think sometimes it's confused that maybe product thinking is meant only for product managers, but that is not the case. And I think product thinking can be used within any team. So it's just a way of thinking, right? It's a way of flipping to thinking from the product perspective. So I just want to talk about that concept and maybe give you a few examples and look at some common sort of tools and frameworks that maybe you can employ in your organization to help you sort of create more successful products. All right. So maybe without further ado, we could start. So I'm very happy to have this opportunity, first of all. So thank you for that. And as I mentioned, I think, right, maybe I'll give a little background about myself. So I'm myself from a tech background. So I started my career some 25 years back purely in technology as a programmer, and then slowly moved on into a more leadership role. And I think about 10 or 11 years back, I started moving into more of a product role. So that's my background. I work with Taylor & Francis Group, which is an academic publishing. And the product I manage there is our B2B ebooks platform. Okay, so to start with, I think, what is product thinking, right? And it's a new term, and there are a number of sort of different definitions out there, and I don't want to start off with the definitions. So what we'll do is we'll try to look at some of the key concepts which are there, which form product thinking, and then we'll try to put the definition together, okay? So we'll start with a sort of a very simple example to just illustrate the point. So let's say, right, you have maybe a sales colleague who comes to you and says that, I would like this report with certain metrics about the customers, and like, please, can I get it soon, right? And you're like, sure, I'll get this done for you. And maybe you take a day, you get the report the way he wants, and you're both reasonably happy with the solution. Now, I think just let's look at the same scenario, but we change something. Let's say this time we decide that let's find out more. Let's find out the context behind why this person has made this particular request, right? And then once you talk to the person who's come with you, the request, you're like, what problem are you solving, right? And he'll let you know that maybe he wants those numbers because he's going to use those numbers and put them into Salesforce, and that's going to allow him to create price lists for specific customers, and that will generate leads for him. And it's a process that takes him a while to do because it's a manual process, but it's a good process because it generates leads, and he does this for his top customers because it's time intensive. Now the conversation has changed, right? Because now you have a different opportunity in place. Like, you can think of other things that you could do besides just giving him the report. You could think that, oh, I could automate this stuff. That you don't have to do this manually for 4 or 5 customers. I can help you automate this, and you can do it for all of them. So that conversation has completely flipped now, right? And it has opened up an opportunity. It allows you to do a lot more and solve the problem better. And it's not just for that particular person, right? Once you build this, maybe other colleagues who are trying to solve the same thing or have different challenges, or maybe even people who are not doing it might think that this is a good idea and start using that, right? So it helps not just the person who asked, but maybe others in the organization as well. So if you look at it, both scenarios gave you an output, but they had very different outcomes. By empathizing and understanding what the person wanted and what he needed instead of just what he asked for, you were able to provide a better service. And that is the first sort of essential concept or principle in product thinking, which is don't stop at what someone asks you. You know, dig deeper and find out what they actually need. Okay, so that was a sort of very simple example. Let's look at our sort of our usual product mix, right? So in the product mix, you have the business. The business has an idea for a product that they would like to sell to the customer. You have technology who are going to build that vision and deliver the product the way you want. And then you have the customers or users who want the product to do something. And there's a reason I have kind of split this customer and user, because they need not be the same people, right? Usually in a B2C space, you will find that customer and user is one and the same. But in a B2B space, like for example, in my product, it's a B2B product. So the people who do the decision to buy the product and the people who are actually using are not the same people. And you need to understand the needs and priorities of both the groups to be able to, help them. So yeah, so these are the three different aspects of people or entities that are part of the product mix. So now let's look at what is important to each of these entities, right? So you have business, right? What's important to business? ROI, maybe growth, market share, the investments they are making, the returns on their investment, success. All of these different things are important to business. What's the focus for technology? And I have been in the technology projects from the beginning of my career. So like the most important things for us are like scope and effort and cost. Of course, we'll also look at things like scalability and security. If you're in an agile team, you are sort of focusing on your story points and your burn rate and your epics and your velocity and things like that. So these are kind of things that your team is constantly focusing on. Then you move over to the customers, right? What are the things that the customer wants, right? Customers have certain needs. They want the product to meet those needs. Maybe they want the product to be more efficient, or they want the product to become more effective at their job. So if you look at it, the three main entities that are involved in the product creation process, they all have different perspectives and different expectations for the product. And what we are hoping is that the result of all this, different focuses and different expectations is going to come into a successful product. And that is the second principle for product thinking. Product thinking aims to reduce the gap between the customer needs and the business goal. So there is this is probably a framework you've seen, this feasibility, desirability, viability. It's a lens of looking at things, right? So very simply, feasibility is, can we do it? Desirability is, does someone want it? And viability is, we don't go broke while doing this, right? And it's important to look at it from this lens because it allows you to balance both sides, right? So for example, if you are creating the product only from the customer's perspective, maybe you'll go broke in the process. So you are not able to actually, run the business and then provide the service. Or if you're looking on the opposite side, that you're doing it only from the organization's perspective, then maybe the products will not get adopted because it's not meeting the needs. I think there was a raised hand that I saw, but if it's okay, can we take the questions at the end of the session? Okay, moving on. Let's say the product is launched, right? How do we know that the product was successful? So we'll look at a number of sort of different signals or metrics to see whether the product was successful. We look at things like the revenue or the market share or the performance or the downloads, maybe if it's an app, and maybe the market mentions and the active users. There are a number of things that you can look at to see whether the product is successful. What if it's not successful? What do? Do we just add more features? Will that help? So before we can answer that, I think we need to look at why do products fail? And we'll look at this purely from the product lens and not other things like economics and business side of it. So we look at it from the product lens. Why do products fail? So customers wanted something and we shipped something else. Obviously, nobody wants to do this, but this does happen. And there are reasons why this could happen. Maybe we never understood what they wanted in the first place, or there was lack of time and resources or some other business constraints, or sometimes we've not done enough competitive studies, right? So the customers' needs were already met well with the other products, and we were not able to do anything that differentiated our product or offer something better or more. Or we were able to get the customers through the door, but we were not able to convert them. And this is again comes down to we are not able to understand the different personas. Or another reason that it could fail is you're not able to retain the converted customer. So you're not able to, provide what they wanted over a period of time. Now, what this all boils down to, if you look at all of the reasons, what it boils down to, the crux of the issue is that the products usually fail when they're not delivering the value. So just providing features will not give you value. It's important that you provide the right features, and the right features will actually deliver the value that you want and be successful. So this brings us to the sort of the third and last principle or concept in product thinking. So the goal of product thinking is to create successful products that deliver value. And this is what we call as the product market fit. Product market fit is basically when you have successfully identified a target customer and serve them with the right product. So now that we have these three different concepts, we can finally look at what is product thinking? And there are a number of definitions, but this is one I think I kind of like. Product thinking is a way of approaching problem solving that keeps the customer's needs in mind and allows you to deliver value to both the customers and business, resulting in successful outcomes. So at its heart, it's a mindset. It's about solving problems, and you are trying to close the gaps between what the customer wants, what the business wants, while delivering value to both. So the first thing that we identified as one of the principles was you need to identify what your customer needs, right? So how do I identify what my customer needs? Quite simple. You start by asking questions, right? So let's look at maybe some of the questions that you can start with, right? Instead of just asking what features, you can ask them, well, what are you trying to achieve? What is the capability this is going to enable? Or you could ask questions like, how did you come up with this feature? Did this come from a direct user feedback? Has this come from our competitors? Do you have any supporting metrics or materials that you can provide me? Or you could ask, which customer base or persona will this help? What happens if we don't do it? Now, the purpose of these questions, right? There are different purposes for each of these, right? One is you're trying to identify what is the problem. Not just what is the feature, but what is the problem? What is the challenge? What are we solving? And then there's a second set of questions that once you've understood the problem, you're trying to refine it and narrow it down and look for opportunities for research. So for example, if it's come from user feedback or it has come from competitors, that opens up an avenue for you to do further research and figure out what's happening. Metrics are great. I mean, if there are any metrics that's showing things, like for example, somebody comes to you saying that, we need to make our e-commerce flow better. And you go in and you create a funnel and you see where your drop-off is, then you realize that, oh, I am really losing customers in this funnel at this process and I need to do something about it. So this gives you an opportunity to research and refine it. And then the third side is where you're looking at the opportunity and impact. And this is important because this actually helps in prioritization. Because you will get a number of requests, right? And how do you pick which one to do first? Because every person that's requesting, for that person, that feature might be very important. So how do you pick? So this lets you see how many people are affected by it, what is the impact if we don't do it, and that will help you in prioritizing what you should do first. So this is the first thing, you start asking questions. Now we'll look at more sort of, that was like a generic start asking questions thing, but there are more models in which you can sort of formally do this structured asking of questions. One of these models is the 5 Ws or 1H model. This is a good model if you are looking at bigger asks where you have a lot of features or a kind of a capability to be enabled. It's also a good starting point for if you're trying to do a brainstorming session. So you're sitting down with your team to understand what to do. It's a good format to do, start with the brainstorming. So the questions are quite simple, right? Sorry, let's go back. Yeah, the questions are quite simple. You're asking the 5 whys. Ws are the what, who, why, where, and when. And the last one, the H, is how. Again, it's similar to the format we saw earlier, right? But it's more structured. So what is the problem we are trying to solve? And this is a good question to start with, because if the requester is not able to clearly articulate the problem or the challenge, then you know it's a clear indicator that we need more research on that. And who are we solving it for? So can we define who is affected? Is it all our customers? Is it a segment of customers? Is it a particular persona? So this lets us size the problem. Why should we solve it? Why is it important? What is the risk of not solving? Now this question, the why question with your who, lets you actually see the actual opportunity size and impact. Now the next two questions, the where and when, are more sort of for refining and narrowing down on or focusing on what the actual areas of problems are. So where are you encountering this problem? This lets you see the context in which the problem occurs. Then when does it occur? How do we see? When do we see it? When did we notice it? Again, this is an opportunity to refine the ask. And then last, once you've understood the sort of the problem space, you're thinking about how do I solve it, right? So how might we solve the problem? You're looking for different suggestions. And these can be, I mean, have you solved it in the past? How do our competitors solve this? What's the best way to solve it? So this gives you a lot of options that you can evaluate and choose. We'll look at one more model. This is the last model that we'll look at for evaluating user needs. This one is called the jobs to be done model. The jobs to be done model, the central idea of this model is quite simple, right? But though it is deceptively simple, it will completely flip your outlook at looking at products, right? So the central idea of the jobs to be done theory is that customers don't buy your product. They hire your product to get a job done. So what it says is that people are not looking for products. People are struggling to do something, and your job is, your product is going to help them complete that job. And that is why they are buying your product. And this will flip you from thinking about your product and thinking more about what is the customer trying to do and why does he need my product in the first place. This theory has been there for a while, but it was popularized by Professor Clayton Christensen. He was a professor at Harvard Business School. So if you ever get time to look at it, this was called the Milkshake Theory because of the example in which he used it, and do look it up. But very simply, actually, what happened is McDonald's hired him to look at how they can increase the sale of their milkshakes. And they had tried a number of things. So they had tried changing the flavors of the milkshake. They tried different pricing strategy. They tried different sizes of the product, and that wasn't having the desired impact, right? So what Christensen did is he tried to look at it from the jobs to be done aspect, right? So he tried to see what was the context in which the product is used. Why was someone buying it? And what he found was that the most people who were buying it early in the morning on their way to work. So the reason they were buying the milkshake was they had this long drive ahead, and this was very convenient to kind of have a milkshake. It lasted longer while they're driving instead of kind of having a fruit which is probably messy, or trying to have a bagel or a donut which has far more calories and gets over quickly. So that was the primary reason that they were buying it. So because that was the reason, what they ended up doing is they just made their milkshakes a little bit thicker. So it lasted longer. They didn't really change the flavoring. They just made it a little thicker, and they made it very quick to buy. So like you could just swipe, and the products were kept in the front of the store so that people could just grab it on the way to work. And that small change of making that milkshake a little bit thicker increased their sales by 7 times. So that's where the power of this framework and the power of thinking in this way makes a change. We'll look at maybe one more example because it's quite an interesting theory. So if you look at the way we travel, right? The way we travel has evolved so much over the last few decades, right? We've gone from horses to cars and things like that. But though the way we travel has changed, the underlying reasons for traveling, right? Why do we travel? We travel for work. We travel to meet people. We travel to go to places. That has not really undergone a massive amount of change. That has always remained the same. And that's, again, is the central concept of this theory. Products can change, but the jobs are stable. And this lets you, I mean, you don't have a moving target anymore. You have a fixed target. You know what people are trying to do. So that gives you a chance to look at your product in that context. And because you have flipped it from your product to thinking about the context, you can also innovate because you're no longer constrained to what your product provides, but you are thinking more of what is the struggle. What are we doing? What are we not doing? Another thing to remember about jobs to be done is they don't need to be all practical jobs. It can be an emotional or a social job as well. So if you ask your users for a list of features, right? I mean, if you ask them what they want, they will give you a list of features, but instead you can focus on the context in which they're using the product. So jobs to be done is very powerful because it can let you see what needs of your customers are unmet or what are underserved or overserved. It will allow you to identify gaps in your offering, or even you can look at your competitors' offering and try to figure out what are the gaps. It lets you discover segments of customers with unmet needs. You can conceptualize breakthrough ideas because you can actually innovate. You're not constrained within your technology or within your product. So there's this very, I think, well-known quote from Henry Ford, right? Where he said that if I had asked my customers, they would have asked for faster horses and not for a car, because the customers were constrained by thinking about the technology while he was thinking about the struggle. Another thing that jobs to be done can do is it can help you craft your marketing messages better because you're thinking about the user's struggles. That lets you come up with words that actually resonate with the customers because you're focusing on their struggles. You're using their words instead of yours, and that appeals to the audience better. Right. So we looked at how to identify needs, right? Before we start with the sort of fun side of actually going to build things, right? There are certain basics or certain fundamentals that are cornerstones for making decisions, and you should be aware of these before you actually start anything. You should be clear about what are your company's goals and objectives. What's your product's vision or product strategy? You should have a fairly good understanding of the domain that you're operating in. What are the regulations or standards in your industry? What is the competitive landscape? Who are your competitors? And the various personas that your product caters to. So once you have all of these, right, this will help you to plan better. We won't go into the sort of the how to create solutions and design thinking, which is probably a whole other workshop in itself. So we'll now look at how to pick and evaluate ideas and how to prioritize them. Okay, so we'll start with, I think this is a very easy metric to start with, value versus effort, right? It's a classic prioritization metric, which almost everyone would be, I think, aware of, right? So you're looking at, there are two axes here. There is the effort and then there is the impact, right? So things, hopefully everything is sort of high impact and low effort, but life's not like that, right? So this lets you divide it and see sort of what is high impact and relatively low effort. So that is a quick win which you can do, or things which are high impact and high effort, but still worth doing because obviously the impact, but they're big bets, but you need to plan a bit more before doing that. And then you have the low effort and low impact, which we may be or kind of fillers, and the high effort, low impact, which you probably want to avoid. So that's a very quick and easy way of prioritizing things. The one thing I would ask you to keep in mind when you're using the metric is that a lot of times, right, when we are looking at value, we are looking at, oh, how can I increase, what are the gains in values? Right? So how can I increase my downloads? Can I get more revenue and things like that? But what you should also try to look at is what is the cost of not doing something? What is the cost of delay? Because it's not just about getting new revenue. You should think about what I need to do to protect my current revenue or protect my current customer base. Okay, going to the next one. This is a value versus unknowns. So this one is a model that lets you do risk analysis, right? And with products, when you're creating new products, this is a very important thing where you understand what are the risks involved. And risks are basically based on your assumptions. You've made some assumptions that I think this product will work because I think this will achieve X thing. But how do you know that those assumptions are right, right? So it's very helpful if you're doing a hypothesis-driven development. So what you should do is write down all your assumptions and think which are the most risky assumptions. And you have to try and figure out what are the ways that I can quickly test or either research or gather data if possible, or I can test things. So where you have fewer unknowns and it has a higher impact, then you can start building in thin slices and measure it to see, because they're relatively low risk. But where you have high impact and a huge number of unknowns, they could have a big payoff, but then these are risky. So you need to figure out how you can test it. Can you do more research? Can you talk to customers? Can you build a thin slice? Can you do some beta testing? So you would want to test these before you actually put all your eggs into that basket. And then, of course, then you have on the lower end of the spectrum where you have fewer unknowns, but the impact is low. So this could be done, maybe, so if they are nice to have, you do it. Or, of course, where there are lots of unknowns and there's very little impact, which you probably want to avoid. So basically understand the risks involved, and you have to craft tests to prove or disprove the assumptions that you've made. Okay, we move on to this one. This, I think, if you're working in an agile team, you'd probably be very familiar with the Moscow analysis method. Moscow analysis is, again, very quick one to use. It categorizes your features into what is a must-have, what should have, could have, and won't have, right? So you know what is absolutely vital, what I need to definitely provide, what is a sort of a high priority thing, what is a nice to have or optional. Or won't have doesn't mean that I'll not build it, but usually it is not now, or maybe we can do it later. And it's a very neat way to understand what's vital to the product, right? And it lets you do sequencing very well. So you know if you're doing developing thin sizes, what are the sequences or phases you will use to develop the whole product. This is another method. It's a scoring model. It's called RISE. It's an acronym. The 4 components in this you have is reach, impact, confidence, and effort. Reach is the number of customers impacted, the whole number of the customers that's impacted. Impact is a numerical scale, and you can decide what scale you want to use. So you can use a 1 to 3 or a 1 to 5 scale. So 1 being on the low end of the spectrum, 3 or 5 being on the higher end. So the higher the impact, the higher number it will get. So if it's a very high impact, high, and medium, and low, and very low, we'll go like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that's the sort of impact number. Confidence is a percentage, and of course it does involve a little bit of intuition and gut feel, but the thing to do here is not go only on pure gut feel. you should try to back your confidence level by some research or metrics. So we know we can do this because we've seen X metric or we've spoken to you or something. So try to back your confidence level or percentage that you're giving by actual metrics. Generally speaking, anything over 75% is you're fairly confident. Anything where you are like 50% or lower, then that you're not very confident of delivering it, right? And then the last one is effort. This is man months, basically, how many man months it will take. So once you do this, you put in your numbers and you come up with it will give you a score for each of the feature capability that you're trying to build. Now, this particular model does require a little bit of practice to kind of figure out what numbers to use. It needs some tweaking, but it's very useful in scenarios where you have massive lists of features, or you have a huge number of stakeholders, and every stakeholder has this big list of things that they want you to do. So when you're trying to actually drive consensus or priority with different groups, this is a good model to kind of come up with a very sort of non-subjective type of scoring. It's not that I don't want to do what this particular stakeholder group is asking, but if you look at the impact and reach and things like that, it looks like we will get better results by prioritizing X features from X group. So when you have a really large stakeholder group driving consensus, this model does work pretty well. Next one is hypothesis. This is more of not prioritization, but before you actually build something. So when you're making assumptions, right? Hypothesis is the difference between sort of an idea and a hypothesis is that hypothesis is always testable. You're always able to test or measure it. If you are not able to test, you're not able to measure, then it is not a hypothesis. Now, one of the formats, and this is one that we use most often as well, is when you're building the hypothesis, what you say is, we believe that building whatever, whether it's a product or a feature, then you identify who you're building it for. So for X personas or group of users or your customer base will achieve outcome. It's important that you know beforehand what are the outcomes that you're trying to drive by that feature. So maybe this is going to increase the downloads, or this is going to increase traffic on my site. You should have very well defined what are the outcomes from the assumption that you've made. And most importantly, the last one is you should know how to measure and test it, because it's an assumption at the end of the day. It could be a wrong assumption. So what are the metrics or measurements you will use to evaluate whether your assumption was right or wrong? And it can be anything. It could be metrics that you're tracking. It could be based on user feedback. So for example, if the assumption is based on customer satisfaction, maybe you're sending out a survey and getting their feedback and saying, yeah, our satisfaction score used to be 60, it's improved to 70 now, so the assumption was right. So that's the hypothesis model. Okay, and this is probably the last of the framework that we'll cover. And it's something which I think everyone is familiar with, is the minimum viable product, right? Now, while minimal viable product is a term that we use very often, what I've seen in a lot of places is that MVP is sort of restricted to just what are the features we can launch with. So the minimum set of features that we can launch with is considered an MVP. And yes, that is sort of one of the models for MVP, but it's not the only one. So what I want to do is I want you to look at this different definition of MVP, because I feel that it widens the scope of what's considered a minimum viable product. So minimum viable product is that version of a new product which allows a team to collect the maximum amount of validated learning about customers with the least amount of effort. This is a very nice way of defining it, because here what you are basically trying to do with the MVP is to test a bunch of assumptions, get a lot of feedback from customers, learn about how the customers are receiving it, and you can do it sort of fairly quickly without doing a lot of upfront investment, maybe in time or cost, right? So we'll look at 4 different models. And these are all models which are sort of, other than the first one that we discussed, which is releasing with a set of features, these are all models that require relatively either no development at all or very little development. So the first one is the Concierge Mvp. So here, basically what you're trying to do is you sell a concierge service to see if the product will work. So basically you are, whatever your product is supposed to do, you try to execute all of that manually to see whether it is actually making a difference to the customer, whether the customer would actually be interested in buying that sort of product, right? So one of the examples I had seen where this was used was this company that was trying to do an app for athletes to help them meditate, and they wanted to do like a 5-minute meditation exercises, right? So instead of kind of creating that whole app, they took a group of users and they used to email them every day in the morning a video to look, a 5-minute video to look at, and they collected feedback. So without actually building the app, they just looked at the content and see if it actually worked in real life. That's the sort of basic concept of a concierge MVP. It has a number of benefits. First, you get real contact with your customers. So there's a lot of learning opportunity. You can actually refine your assumptions. You don't need to build anything. So it's a great way to gather enough data if you want to convince your stakeholders or investors on a new idea. It allows you opportunities for ethnographic interaction. So besides the sort of direct interaction that you had with customers, usually when you're doing this thing manually, you are in the space with your customers. So that opens up opportunities for observational learning. So not just direct feedback, you're even observing what's happening. So that again makes it very rich, gives you rich data for your assumptions. The one sort of caveat for this is that in this model, there is a slight possibility that you could introduce bias based on the likability of the concierge. So generally you would find, let's say, if the founder of the app is trying to do it himself to sort of prove the hypothesis behind this, he might be very well versed with the ideas, it might be very clear, and he might come across like who really understands everything. So because the people interacting with him like the way he's conducting it, that may introduce a bias, and maybe the product is not able to sort of match the service level that that person is doing. So yeah, that's one sort of small caveat in this model. Second model, this is a very nice model. This is called the Wizard of Oz MVP, right? And if you've seen Wizard of Oz, you know the ending, right? Where they find that there was somebody behind the screen actually pulling the levers. So what you do in this particular MVP is some of the tasks are done manually or by a human to mimic a mature system. Probably give you an example. So I had used this in when I was consulting for a startup. So this startup was, they had a social platform for professionals in the video field, right? And what they wanted to do is when someone posts a requirement for a video, they wanted to use a set of rules that will sort of pick professionals, match them to that particular posting, and then send some of the recommended contacts with a rating or a recommendation score. And to do that, we actually did a bunch of interviews to figure out what are the key sort of features on which people measure things and pick people, and have this whole complex rule set in the background. But before building that whole rule set and inserting it into the workflow, we did something similar to this. So what we did is the rest of the workflow is automated, but the part where the score calculation came up, we actually picked up things and we put it through the model manually and came up with the scores. And then we had a human panel that made their own recommendations, and we tried to match it and see how our engine was doing. And we sent our recommendations and then we asked them for feedback on that. So this is a great model if because it's very cost effective and it lets you very quickly mimic a fully functional system rather than building. And those of us in technology, you know, it is easier to change things at the design level rather than after you've coded everything. Building and modifying at that stage is costlier, time consuming. Again, it lets you very quickly see how a mature system should behave. And since the data is generated on the final system, right, it doesn't have the bias like in the concierge system. The only caveat here is that since the humans are doing the manual job, you have to make sure you're doing a good job. Because if you introduce mistakes and trying to do it manually, then that can affect your test data. That will bring us to the third model. Third model for MVP is called the landing page MVP. So here you basically design a single page that describes your product, what is the value proposition, and you have a call to action button, like a sign up probably. The benefits are, again, this is very cost effective and you can easily gauge interest. If you have multiple landing pages, you can even judge which message is resonating better with users. It will get you a list of interested customers that you can reach out to later. The small drawback is that if people don't click your call to action, you may not know why they did it. So what was the reason? So that may not be clear. That brings us to the last of these four models. This is the email MVP. So here it's quite similar to the landing page, but instead of a landing page, you're actually sending an email, which can also have a call to action or a reply. I had used this recently for my product actually. We wanted to introduce a feature for librarians to co-brand on the site, and we had a number of suggestions and templates. And what we did is we just sent across some of that to our group of librarians to ask them, what do you feel about this? And it really helped because not only did we get to know whether they liked or didn't like or which one they liked, but some of the librarians were like quite enthusiastic and we got suggestions beyond what we expected, right? So they sent us some feedback like, we like the way this is implemented on this site, or here are our specs, or we would also like this information. So that very quickly, before building anything, it let us see what resonated with our customers and what they really wanted. So again, this is a cost-effective way you can gauge interest, and you can gauge interest by multiple things, whether like people are opening the mail and also if they are using the reply or call to action to reply to you. It gives the opportunity for users to send you more detailed feedback if they want. And the only sort of drawback is this works for an existing customer base. So it's not for new customers. So this is when you're trying to do something for your existing customer base. And yeah, so that's the last of the models. And I think that's almost the end of the presentation. We just want to do a sort of a quick recap of what we discussed. So basically, now that we've gone through all this, what you can see is product thinking is sort of like a bridge between what the customer wants and what are the goals for the organization. So you have a customer who has his own jobs and struggles and needs and looking for value. And then you have the business who have their own strategy, they're looking at the ROI, they have a mission, and they're going to test and build and measure to kind of provide better products. And product thinking will sort of use all of these different tools to kind of capture the needs and test out things too, so that the end goal is that the product that you're providing from your business, you achieve a product market fit. And yeah, so hopefully this was relevant and useful. And I think, yeah, time check, I think that leaves us some time for questions. We'll stop sharing for the moment.
Yes, yeah. Thank you, Shweta. It was a very detailed yet very very insightful presentation, because I am not from a tech background, but that was really interesting to see how the tech world has actually advanced so much that we can apply so many of those features to everyday experiences, right? I clearly remember the example of the milkshake that you pointed out. That was so true. And that's what we do every single day, but we don't realize that, right? Amazing. So thank you so much. We have a couple of questions though here. Shweta said, I'm an experienced professional with a technology development background. I'm interested in moving to product development. So from tech to product, how do I prepare myself for the move?
Good question. Thing is, even I did this move, but at that point, I think product management was not sort of this very discrete category. So though we were in the product role, we were not really called product managers, and it happened gradually. But I think now there are a lot of great resources available. There are a lot of courses available. There's a lot of rich material that you can read. And I think moving from technology to the product side, I think it has its own advantages, right? But you should try to think about the business aspect of it and the design aspects of it as well, because as a product person, right, you are not necessarily a specialist, but you are a generalist, because I think one of the things that people think is, okay, the product manager is the one who's coming up with all the ideas and they're responsible for it, but not always. So yes, you do come up with ideas, but you are the sort of the central person. You're the curator of all good ideas, and you're helping the organization move forward. Like in my profession, right, in Taylor and Francis, I mean, we are providing services for researchers. I have no research background, right? And we have some fantastic SMEs who understand the space, right? I don't understand the space, but what I understand are the basics of how do I pick something, how do I prioritize something, how do I build something, or how do I test if it's working, right? But there are SMEs who are actually providing the key knowledge, and it's important that you are able to bring them on board. So I think besides the sort of the technical aspects of it, it's a job that requires good communication. So you do need to be a very effective communicator. You have to have empathy. You have to have the ability to learn. And I think in technology, you do have that thing, because I think technology moves so quickly that if you're not learning every day, you're not suited for the job. So I think you already have a great experience. And in another thing in product management is now that it's becoming more popular, there is more differentiation. Like it's not just one product manager. You can have technology product managers where your key role is that you understand the technology, or at least aspects of the technology, so you're able to do it better. So yeah, I would say go out there, look at some of the key resources there. Try to, in your organization, try to speak up about your desire to go into the role and speak to your managers and to kind of have a path paved for you to move forward.
That's great. I hope that answers your question. So that's very interesting. The term that you brought in your answer, Shweta, the term empathy, right? We don't usually relate empathy to tech, but it seems like it's very ingrained right there. But we seem to miss it all the time. So when it's being creative, technology is seen as something very routine, very monotonous, very like a plateau of sorts. But if you look at it, there's a lot of creativity that goes into product thinking. There's design, and there's so many other elements that require so many other capabilities, right? So would you agree on some level that it's not about gender anymore, right? It's not about having more women in technology or less men or creating a balance, but in terms of balance of skills and capabilities is what I think. What's your thought on that?
Oh, absolutely. It is definitely a balance, right? Because, and we've seen this, right? I mean, I've been on the technology side, right? And as a programmer, I was always keen that, oh, I want to try this new language and I want to try this new framework. And yes, it's fun from my perspective. It was great opportunity. Oh, this will go on my CV, right? But I don't think I was thinking at that point that was it worth using this framework? Did it actually help the user? Um, did it help my organization? Did it make our tech stack very complicated to manage in the future? For a new person coming in, there were 15 different things in tech stacks, and we were not able to find people to be able to develop on or maintain that product. I wasn't thinking about that, right? But that comes with time, and that balance happens. And I think with the position that you are as a product manager, right? You're in the center, and you're kind of you're literally in the center. So there is the product team that has its own requirements, and the stakeholders, the business stakeholders. You have your customers. And, everybody has a different perspective. That's the first thing you have to acknowledge. Everyone has their own perspective, and in their world and from their perspective, they're right. You have to come out somehow. That's the whole thing. How do you balance things?
I agree completely. I think it couldn't be more relevant than today, right? Because the pandemic has shifted the focus on the male-dominated industry being technology. We still have so few women in tech, even though there've been so many pioneers of so many technologies in the past. So I think it's a very pertinent question, and you've answered it beautifully. It's a very basic concept, but that we fail to see, I think. So the last question that I could have time for is from Moshni, who says, I have a career gap of 8 years. My last role was as a SAS certified analyst with Cognizant. What would be my best career path as a returnee to work? So she was a SAS certified analyst before her break with an MCA. So I think the pertinent question that we also get asked, as a women career platform is, how will you return to work after a gap with, the confidence, and not just the confidence, but the skills to keep up with the latest technology. So what would your advice be to, I'm going to generalize this a little bit so more people can, get the benefit out of it. So if you're returning women to technology, what would be like your advice for them? Take it up.
So I think we've all seen gaps. I mean, life happens, right? I think first thing we have to stop being apologetic for having a gap. Life happens, things happen, priorities come up, you need to take gaps. So I would say first, don't be apologetic about taking a gap. You needed to take a gap, right? And a gap is not going to affect your skills. So if you are a person who's skilled in a particular area, that gap is not going to affect your skills, right? You can, and I think you should be able to talk about the gap. Why did I take the gap, right? There was a reason behind it. There was a driver behind it. And now that I'm returning, why am I returning? What is my objective for returning? And it doesn't matter whether, maybe you took the gap to study, or maybe you took it for a personal reason, right? Your learning does not need to stop. You could have been prepared for it. And you're like, yeah, I know that I was working on X platform, and I know that in the 2 years I was missing, this new thing is coming. I'm actually excited to learn the new thing. And I have done it in the past, right? I have learned my technology has changed over the last 5 years I was working. And I'm excited to try this new thing, and I'm really good at it. And it's not that if I'm on the job, I'm always not everyone is actually always learning. You might be stuck doing the same thing. So I think first, don't be defensive about the gap. Gaps happen. Be very confident in that. I have the ability to learn, and I will learn, and I'm excited about coming back, and I can provide value because I have these skills in my arsenal.
Perfect. I like how this session has carried on from the basics of product thinking to everything in between, to making a career switch, to coming back after a break. I think at the end of it, I'm really happy to say that there are women who still want to pursue roles in technology, but they somehow don't know where to start. And I think this is where the problem lies. It's like you clearly said, make up your mind, decide what you want to do, and constantly keep learning. And I think it's true of any field, right? But technology especially is changing according to the world around us. So I think it's really important, and it's a pleasure to have had you with us to discuss these wonderful concepts. And you've broken it down so beautifully, so for all of us to understand here. So thank you so much for your valuable time. And thank you to all of you in the participants who've been so engaging, and hope you took away some very cool insights from Shweta today. Thank you so much, Shweta. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the session. Please do stay tuned for the session till about 6:30 in the evening today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Everyone enjoys the rest of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Shweta. Thank you.